Good evening. I'd like to call the Gurnee Village Board regular meeting of May 20th, 2019 to order. Roll call, please, Andy.
Hood.
Here.
Thorstensen.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Garner.
Here.
O'Brien.
Present.
Balmas.
Present.
6 present.
All right. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, welcome, and first order is approval of the consent agenda as presented. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Motion by trustee Balmas, second by trustee Garner. Roll call, please, Andy.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstensen.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Balmas.
Aye.
6A.
Motion carries. Patrick, please read the consent agenda into the record.
Item number 1, approval of the minutes from the May 6, 2019 meeting. Item number 2, approval of ordinance 2019-32, authorizing execution of an amendment to modify the agreement for retail, sanitary sewer, and water supply services to the Village of Gurnee, Aldi, 7520 West Grand Avenue. Item number 3, approval of ordinance 2019-33, granting a non-exclusive communications utility easement to Woodland District 50. Item number 4, approval of resolution 2019-05, indemnifying the state of Illinois for the temporary closure of Route 132 crossings at Six Flags Parkway and Gurnee Mills Circle East for Wonder Woman Run Series. Item number 5, approval of request from Public Works Department to purchase 178 LED streetlight heads and 65 streetlight poles from the low bidder, City Electric Supply, at a cost of $136,180. Item number 6, approval of request from Engineering Division to waive the competitive bidding process and award pavement evaluation services to Infrastructure Management Services at a cost not to exceed $29,998. Item number 7, approval of Police Officer Austin Dembski's request to participate in the village's tuition assistance program in pursuit of a master's degree in law enforcement and public safety leadership from the University of San Diego. Item number 8, approval of Police Department request to allow K-9 Officer Dan Ruth to represent the Gurnee Police Department and instruct at the International Association of Auto Theft Investigators Conference in Lexington, Kentucky from June 2nd through the 6th, 2019 at an estimated cost of $2,900. Item number 9, approval of setting bid date of July 5th, 2019 for banking services. Item number 10, approval of payroll for period ending May 10, 2019 in the amount of $888,280.01. Item number 11, approval of bills for period ending May 20th, 2019 in the amount of $4,732,252.70.
Thank you, Patrick. Do I have a motion to approve? Motion by trustee Garner, second by trustee O'Brien. Roll call, please.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstensen.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Balmas.
Aye.
6A.
Motion carries. We have no petitions or communications tonight.
Correct.
So move on to reports. And Patrick, an update on one of our ambulances?
Yeah, as I had in the board notes, on April 18th, one of our ambulances was rear-ended on the tollway while responding to a motor vehicle accident. Driver sustained some minor injuries, missed a couple shifts, but is back and fine. Passenger had no injuries. Ambulance, on the other hand, didn't fare too well. It's down in Indiana at Fire Service Inc., who manufactures our ambulances for us. I was hoping to have some information tonight as to where we would be, but we haven't got that information yet. They are bringing in a special engineer to take a look at the unit. We think it's going to be totaled. We've talked to insurance about it. They're just looking for that confirmation from Fire Service Inc. So that ambulance is out of service, will be out of service for the foreseeable future. The timeline to repair or replace is about the same, so we're probably looking at September either way, whether they total the unit or not. Luckily, a couple of years ago, we kept a reserve ambulance in the fleet, so we have 5 ambulances, so that reserve ambulance has been brought up to the front line and is currently in service, but that's not a sustainable vehicle to be operating. So I just wanted to put this on reports. Presuming the ambulance is totaled, we'll have to sign a service contract with Fire Service Inc. To get that unit ordered. We currently have a unit that they're going to start constructing for us that was approved via this year's budget process. So we know what it costs, we know what the timelines are, but I just didn't want you shocked if you saw something come through that a second ambulance had been ordered. So as soon as we hear from insurance, where we're at on that, whether it's going to be totaled or repaired, I'll let the village board know. But just wanted to, as I said, give you a heads up on where we're at.
Any questions? All right. And we'll move on to old business. We discussed at our last meeting, approval ordinance 2019-34, approving an agreement between the Village of Gurnee and Waste Management of Illinois. Changes?
Yeah, so there was no changes from what Jack presented at the last meeting except for one. We had some most favored nations language in there that's been in there for a while. We've never acted on it with communities and the services all being a little unique. It'd be difficult to act upon anyways. So Waste Management had proposed removing that, which they've tried to do the last couple of contracts. We've just persisted to leave it in because it's always been in there. But after consulting with Swalco, Attorney Winter, the language really didn't do anything for us. In exchange for removing that language, Waste Management agreed to do an additional week of unlimited landscape waste collection. So in the spring, we will have 2 weeks of unlimited landscape waste, which helps us a little bit because the weather, it can be fidgety in the spring. It's always tough on when to start that program. With it being wet in the spring, some people can't get out in their yards. And then as soon as that week is over, we'll have a great weekend. And then we field a ton of calls at Village Hall. So we'll have 2 weeks of unlimited landscape waste collection. Otherwise, everything else in the contract's the same. Rate reduction in the first year and freezer rates, 2.5% annual increases after year one. Subscription program going down by $10 a year. The customer service standards, insurance, all that stuff remains in. Food scrap ride-along is in there. And as I said, the extra week of unlimited landscape waste collection, and then the leaf collection program. So just as a reminder, we worked with Warren Township and Grays Lake, looked at all of our pricing, and whoever had the best pricing, that's what we went with. So all the communities that worked together all benefited. So,
Questions from the trustees?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by trustee Balmas, second by trustee Ross. Roll call, please.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstenson.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Balmas.
Aye.
6-8.
All right, move on to new business. Motion carries, we'll move on to new business. Approval of ordinance 2019-35, approving a redevelopment agreement for Gurnee Mills renovations between the Village of Gurnee and Mall at Gurnee Mills for the Alpha Media tenant space. All right, Patrick, just a brief overview again.
sure. So this was the topic of our public hearing earlier. We approved an agreement last year with Gurnee Mills and Alpha Media to bring this to reality. When they went back and actually looked at some of the cost estimates, they changed. So Gurnee Mills and Alpha Media have been working on it over the past year. The ask from the village has increased from $93,000 to $200,000 over a 3-year period, with the mills taking their contribution from $200,000 up to $600,000. This will bring 4 radio stations into a site that has been without a permanent tenant for over 10 years. It's 8,600 square feet up between Burlington and Floor & Decor. It'll be set up where there'll be glass on the outside so those visiting can actually see the DJs performing their jobs. Also be utilization of the show court by Alpha Media throughout the year, committed to 32 events, which will bring shoppers and visitors into Gurnee, hopefully spend some money out at the mall and generate sales tax revenue.
All right.
Move to approve.
Okay, I was going to see if Carl wanted to say anything, but that's okay. I have a motion to approve from trustee Ross, second by trustee Thorstenson. Discussion. All right, roll call, please, Andy.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstenson.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Balmas.
Aye.
6-8.
All right, motion carries. Welcome to Gurnee. Wow, a year's worth of work, and we're like 2 minutes. We're gonna love having you. This is exciting. All right, item number 2 is related, approval of ordinance 2019-36, 36, approving a trade agreement between the Village of Gurnee and Alpha Media for local broadcast services. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by trustee Garner,
Second.
second by trustee O'Brien. Roll call, please, Andy.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstenson.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
6 aye.
All right, and again, related, approval of ordinance 2019-37, setting forth a legislative finding and declaration pertaining to ordinance number 2018-07 and 2018-08, granting approval of a redevelopment agreement with Gurnee Mills to renovate tenant space and approval of a local broadcast service agreement with Alpha Media. We are basically just taking last year's agreement and making it null and void.
So moved.
Motion by trustee Garner, second by trustee Thorstensen. Roll call, please.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstenson.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
6 aye.
All right, motion carries. This is great. This is going to be really exciting to have you out there, and we're really glad that it came together and looking forward to it. And good deal. All right, then move on to item number 4, approval of ordinance 2019-38, amending Chapter 78 of the Gurnee Municipal Code, adding Section 78-108 parenthetical B, and amending Chapter 2, Section 2-311 to increase the penalties for certain parking violations. Patrick, you want to explain?
Sure. So this is an item that has been before the village board as well. Up on Swanson Court, we've had some issues with semi-truck parking in the past. When the area was developed, initially, maneuvering semi-trucks and using the street to back into loading docks was common practice. So therefore, we've got a couple businesses up there where they need to do that. The problem is when semi-trucks show up and queue up to deliver for another business, where they park blocks the other business's ability to maneuver into their loading dock. So we initially, a couple years back, designated a section as no parking, 24/7. Let that go for a little bit, came back and tweaked it and made it no parking from 8 to 4 to see how that would work. There's still been issues up there. We've been in contact with both the company impacted and the company whose deliveries are doing the impacting. Little Lady Foods is the company that has the trucks queuing up for delivery. They have stated as one vendor that they're working with, hoping to get it resolved by the end of the month. But in the meantime, to increase the deterrent a little bit, we're proposing to bump up the fines for commercial vehicles that park in that area. Right now it's $25 when our police officers show up and a semi-truck's parked there. They take the $25 ticket, and it's more valuable for them to get that load delivered than it is to try to avoid the ticket. So we're proposing for commercial vehicles to bump that first offense up from $250 to $250 for the first offense, $500 for the second offense. We've communicated this both to Little Lady Foods as well as the company that's being impacted. They both acknowledged it, and obviously the company that's being impacted is appreciative of it. We're also going to do some pavement marking up there to make it more visible. That is a no parking area. So we're hopeful that Little Lady Foods gets this taken care of by the end of the month. But if not, this gives a little bit more bite to the tickets and hopefully deters that parking.
Questions for Patrick?
Make a motion to approve.
Motion by trustee Balmas,
Second.
second by trustee Thorstensen. Roll call, please, Andy.
Hood. Yes. Thorstenson.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
6 aye.
All right, motion carries. You'll let the business owner know tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Moving on, item number 5, approval of ordinance 2019-39, authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement between the County of Lake, City of Waukegan, and Village of Gurnee to coordinate and fund ambient air sampling for ethylene oxide. Do you want me to just introduce Mark?
Sure.
All right.
Just one second.
I'm going to put you up to bat right away. Here, I'll give you a mic.
Just the wireless if you want.
So you want to stand over there. Mark Pfister's here with us. Welcome. We're delighted that you're here with us tonight. Mark was instrumental. I know we've discussed testing for several months, and all of us were testing for the sake of testing without being able to do anything with the results. It was difficult to justify spending tax dollars on. Mark stepped up to the plate and really pulled this together, did an amazing job of coming up with a plan that's actionable and gets us what we need, and he's going to walk us through the whole setup. So Mark, it's all yours.
Sure. And I first wanted to thank the mayor and also Pat as well as Brian for their professionalism as going through this process, is that we are also working with our partners from the city of Waukegan. So I do want to thank you for the level of interest that you've had in this. And so we're at the point where we're going to move forward. So just to start off with is that, as you remember, is in 2018, the U.S. EPA released something known as NADA. And so that NADA map came out, and it demonstrated that only for the Medline site, but not for Vantage, because the Vantage data was not included. But it did show areas in Lake County, especially around the Waukegan area, that had higher risk than what was expected for other areas in Lake County. So that risk is that there was blue boxes, light blue boxes, darker yellow boxes, and light yellow boxes. But for those that lived in the blue boxes, is that there was a 100 in a million risk higher than other areas surrounding the Medline site. And so what that means is that, I'm going to translate that down. I really don't like the use of 100 in a million, because it's really 1 in 10,000. So you have a 1 in 10,000 risk for 70 years of exposure. So that's a lifetime exposure of 70 years to have a 1 in 10,000 risk. So one of the aspects of NADA is that it's really a screening tool. And so what it's to be used for is to point out areas that we need to look at further. Is there additional risk than what is expected due to some type of toxic release? And in this case, it's ethylene oxide. So once that came out, we immediately started working with the county board, working with the village of Gurnee and the city of Waukegan, to attempt to get US EPA and IEPA to do ambient air testing in Lake County like they did in DuPage County for Willowbrook. And so I think the audience knows, as well as the trustees know, is that US EPA declined to do ambient air testing in Lake County, as well as IEPA declined. The mayor and I and Patrick met with the director of IEPA down in Chicago, along with the mayor of the city of Waukegan. That was an ask, and at that point in time, he said that IEPA was also unwilling. So as the partners, and for the concern of our citizens, because they were certainly interested in understanding what is the current ambient air quality test, or ETO concentrations in Lake County. So that led us to start reviewing what is done in Sterigenics. We looked at the sampling that the village of Willowbrook paid for, which was a little bit more limited. They had really a 1 day where they did a lot of sampling in 1 day, and then they also had another 5 sites that they were looking at for a 30-day period. US EPA also did their own testing, and so that ended up being for over 90 days at approximately 10 sites. And so what we're proposing to this board is that around the Vantage area that we're going to have at least 5 sites. One of them will be a remote site to get what is the background, and then the other sites will be right near Vantage. And so what we had US EPA do is do modeling. And what that modeling is to look at the windrows, or what direction does the wind come from, what are the wind speeds, looking at it over a 5-year period, but also recently. Where is the wind coming from, where is it going, how fast is it moving? And so with that modeling, what we found is that the majority of the winds are coming in June and July from the southwest to the northeast. So you can picture, Vantage, the wind is moving from either the west, blowing across Vantage, from perpendicular to Delaney Road, or moving across 41 past Vantage and then going up towards Spalding School, as an example. So with that modeling is that we're going to be ground truthing these sites to determine where best to put the sites. Some of the things that you can't do with this type of air quality testing is that you don't want to put your canisters, literally what we're going to be doing is setting up a canister that's pressurized, and it'll be collecting a sample of air over 24 hours. And so that'll be a weighted average for those 24 hours. And so what we don't want is you don't want to put a canister right by a tall building, because that'll affect the wind pattern. So you want to have it a distance away from that building equal to the height of at least equal to the height of the building. Or you don't want to put it near big stands of trees. So you want it more out in the open areas so not to affect the sampling. Additionally, the sampling will, for what we're proposing, is that it'll be 30 days, and so we'll be sampling every 3 days. So every, day 1, we'll have a canister out for 24 hours, day 4, day 7, day 10. But what we're going to do is throw in some random canisters also. So we're going to be randomizing that using just random numbers. And so maybe if it was scheduled to be done on day 7, maybe we'll have another canister out there on day 8. Maybe it'll also be on day 9. It's all random. So that way we can assure that we're putting in canisters during the time frame that we're studying over that 30-day period. So the intent is to hire one company to GHD to go out and collect the samples, and then that company will take those canisters and actually will split the air within that canister between 2 different labs. So it'll be the lab for Willowbrook, the one that Willowbrook used, and also the lab that EPA used. So, which in some ways is very good, because then you get correspondence that, the goal is that each lab will come back with the same number or very close. So they're willing to do that for the same price. So that data will be collected over 30 days. We've also been in discussions with IEPA and ATSDR. So one of the things that your dollars, our dollars, is that we're attempting to leverage additional dollars from IEPA and ATSDR to continue the sampling past 30 days. So this could go to 60 days or go to 90 days if that funding comes through from those entities. So some of the other aspects that we are going to be comparing and contrasting is that since this just happened 40 miles away from us in Sterigenics, is what we're going to be doing is looking at the numbers that we have here in Lake County, comparing and contrasting it to what was happening at Sterigenics. So just to put this out there is going back to that 1 in 10,000 risk. So that 1 in 10,000 risk is equal to 0.02 micrograms per cubic meter. Okay, that's the amount. But when Sterigenics was operating, they were getting some hits that were 4s, 6s, 12s. So really, they were in a 1 in 10 risk, 1 in 100 risk, so there was much higher risk when Sterigenics was operating. But when Sterigenics had the seal order placed on them, that the concentration dropped by an order of magnitude. So it went down to 0.2, 0.4. But even at background levels, that it is still at a 1 in 1,000 risk. So even the background levels currently in Willowbrook is still 10 times more higher risk than what the original NATA statement was. So that's just something I wanted to put out there, is that if we are finding higher concentrations around the site, we may also be finding background concentrations at 2 of our remote stations that may be more similar to what the background was in Sterigenics, because there are other sources of ETO rather than just the 2 plants, Vantage and Medline. So we do know that cigarettes, as an example, we know that ETO is coming from cigarettes. We do know that mobile sources also are releasing ETO. When you fill up your gas tank, there is ETO being released. But so the goal is that over this 30-day period that we get an understanding of what the baseline concentrations are of ETO. And so what we're going to be doing is field truthing these sites. We have stated that we're going to have 5 sites for each location. We may add two sites, just because what we're trying to do is to have a better understanding of that break point between Medline is here, Vantage is here, so we're also thinking about putting in two sites at either direction. So if the wind's coming out of the northeast and blowing to the southwest, what is that moving towards Medline? But if it's moving from the southwest to the northeast, how far is that ETO moving towards the Vantage site? We're also going to have a few sites to the east of, just because there is some wind patterns that are moving, but very slight. But the majority of the wind patterns that were in the modeling are definitely going from west-southwest to northeast or north. So that's where we're really going to have those sites put in. And then we also may have a site that is to the northeast, let's say, of Medline. And so then we'll also have another site just a couple, less than, a quarter mile away from that, so we can determine how quickly the ETO is dispersing as it moves to the northeast, as an example. So that is the goal of this project, is to have a great understanding of what the current ambient air testing results are for ETO. And then once we have that data, as you probably remember, I petitioned the ATSDR to do a health risk assessment. And this is really the important part, is having that data is good, but then having a better understanding of, well, what is the true risk to our residents? That's what ATSDR has said that they are going to do on our behalf. And so that is the gist of it. I'll take any questions if you have them.
Trustees, questions from the trustees? Trustee Gurnee?
If levels of ETO are higher, let's hope they aren't, but if they should come back unexpectedly higher than we expect them to, how do you determine what the source is when you've got it coming from multiple sources? How do you define more clearly whether it's Vantage or it's the other sources?
Yeah, and that's why we'll be looking at the wind patterns on the day that that canister was put out. So if the winds were out of the northeast coming southwest, and we're going to have our sites relatively close to the facilities, so we'll be picking up any high concentrations coming off the plants. And so we'll know, but that's where having those additional sites downwind is, then we can see how quickly or rapidly the ETO is dispersing. So that'll help us look at where the potential source is. Again, I think and we'll also look at the example of Sterigenics. Once they stopped operating, there was an order of magnitude reduction once they stopped operating. So that's what we're doing, is comparing and contrasting what are it's a nice natural experiment. Is that what was happening in Sterigenics? Are our levels similar to Sterigenics when they were operating? And then what is our background? So do we have similar background concentrations as they did in Willowbrook?
Sure, thank you.
Trustee O'Brien?
So I understand the county's going to be taking the samples and sending them to ATSDR, right?
So what's going to happen is that this contract will hire a contractor, GHD. They will actually set up the canisters. They will take those canisters. The samples will be split and set to two different labs. We will be the project manager on it, but then we will also be assuring that they're following the appropriate QA/QC. They'll be following the QAP, and then once those results come back, they'll be coming back to the health department.
And, Mary? And once you submit it to the hired people, do you know the rough turnaround when we'll find out results, or what effect it might have on us, not just the raw number?
Yeah, so what will happen is, and don't forget, there's going to be a little bit of a delay, because once the canister is put out, it usually takes about 2 weeks for data to come back, because they have to go through a QA process, make sure it has to be analyzed. So we probably won't get the first results until 2 to 3 weeks in, so almost half of our modeling time frame will already be passed by the time we even get those first results. But once we get those results, we will be sending them down to ATSDR so that they can start plugging it into their model and doing their risk assessment. Now, they have told us that they should have those results back to us in 3 to 6 months. But again, we're certainly pushing them to get it to 3 months or less for that. But there will be a delay, so really the final sample on day 30, it'll be well into July. But, our desire is to continue sampling 60 days to 90 days. One of the reasons for that is that Vantage actually already has their dry scrubber, some additional controls in place. They're going to be doing air emission testing on it actually tomorrow. And so just to see what reductions that they're having with their current emissions, whereas Medline, they just got their permit application, and that'll be at a public hearing at Whittier School coming up on Thursday to discuss their permit. But then they do have to go through some of the city of Waukegan. They're going to have to go for a variance because the stack height is higher now than it was before, so they'll have to go through their public comment period, et cetera. So they probably won't have their new controls on until after our 30-day sampling is over. So that's why we've requested IEPA that they continue monitoring or helping fund this monitoring after day 30.
Thank you.
Trustee Thorstensen?
Possibly it's tagging on what Trustee O'Brien was also getting at is, so ATSDR, you said they'll be doing the risk assessment, taking this information and putting it into that for us. How often, are they always involved in something like this? I mean, are they never involved? What's the report that you have on ATSDR?
Yeah, so ATSDR is actually an arm of CDC, so that's the Agency for Toxic and ATSDR, Substance and Disease Registry, so ATSDR. So CDC, they're an arm, they're specialized in this, they do this for all kinds of toxics across the nation. They did the work, for US EPA. They did an initial one, just based on 2 days of sampling, but they're going to be doing additional risk assessment based on the longer-term sampling they just completed. So Mark Johnson, I've been working with him very closely, and actually just since we've been having a lot of events lately, Mark Johnson, ATSDR, was just up here for the anhydrous ammonia with US EPA when they were doing the air testing. We just completed with CDC, we did a survey around the neighborhoods just to follow up on the individuals that were exposed to that anhydrous ammonia. So they're located out of Chicago, but their main office is out of Atlanta.
Trustee Hood?
Yes, just a question as far as the cooperation that you've received from Vantage and Medline, and also as a second question, just to comment on the Village of Gurnee's interaction with you, and what can we do further from this point forward that would assist in the process?
Yeah, I should point out that I think Vantage compared to Medline, Vantage since day one has been talking about doing their own ambient air testing, and they will be doing it. I do know that they're going to have multiple sites around their plant also. We have been working with them to attempt to get them to use GHD, the same contractor, to collect the samples, but they may be using a different lab than the other two that we have. We will co-locate at least one site with Vantage just so that we can assure that whatever data that they're collecting is matching our data. And so we are going to have one site that is co-located with Vantage. They've been very accessible. I talk to Drew Richardson probably every 2 weeks. He's been giving me updates on the dry scrubber. Medline, on the other hand, has not committed to doing any air quality testing at this point. So that's just something that is a corporate decision on their part. And so, I think a lot of as you probably read in the paper, Sterigenics is saying that, a lot of their ETO may have been due to other sources. But again, I think that big order of, magnitude reduction shows that they were, a large source of the ETO once they stopped operating. It went back to a baseline that still is high, but not as high as it was.
Is there something are there some things you need from us that would make this go more smoothly or more effective?
No, again, I just want to thank the mayor and Pat and also Brian. I mean, they've been more than effective with us. I mean, we worked on the IGA, that went very smoothly. I think just having the Village of Gurnee as well as City of Waukegan, I think one of the great things is you have your professional services line is different than the county, where we have it capped, yours is not. So that's one reason why the contract going through you and the City of Waukegan is an easier way to do this contract.
Trustee Garner?
Is there a current, what is the current acceptable level of ETO that we're shooting for?
Well, that's one thing, is this type of model, it's called a non-threshold linear model. So just picture a straight line, that anywhere on that line, there is some risk. But I will say is that the methodology that we're using for air quality sampling, actually the detection limit of our methodology is higher than that 1 in 10,000 standard. So that standard is set at 0.02, and our detection limit is 0.1 part per billion. But this gets into much deeper risk assessment, and so it's all based on what is the potency factor of the chemical, in this case ethylene oxide. As you probably remember in 2016, that they changed it from a potential carcinogen to a carcinogen, and so the potency factor dropped way down, which is why it's a much lower concentration that we're talking about here as these risk assessments are based on. Whereas OSHA, so OSHA will allow individuals to be exposed at 1 part per million. So you're talking 7 orders of magnitude higher for what occupational exposure could be compared to what we're talking about here, which is community exposure. And so I just one equation that I always give out is that risk is equal to the hazard. In this case, the hazard is ETO times the exposure pathway. And so, but wherever that potency factor is set, that's where the starting point is your potential risk if you're in a place where you're going to be exposed at higher levels.
Trustee Balmas?
And you were talking about the ambient. In both cases, both Vantage and Medline are located where high traffic areas.
Mm-hmm.
So are they, when you talk about these canisters, is that not going, is your readings will be taking some of that into effect too? So it's not just the companies, it's what else is affecting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so whatever, that'll be additive. So whatever is being emitted, from these two plants, you will have some additive pieces coming from normal background. And I should tell you that ETO is not naturally produced, it's, produced by man. So it will be additive for that. But if we use the stereogenics example, so again, there was an order of magnitude. So if you were getting, readings of 4, but once stereogenics stopped operating, it was at 0.4. So you're, so maybe that 4 was 3.6. From what may have been the contribution, but that's where you don't know exactly what the contribution is from the plant.
Ask these companies to shut down for a day so you can get that kind of a reading, or?
Well, again, that is what the seal order effectively did, was showed, what the potential contribution was from stereogenics.
Thank you.
I just have a couple questions. I just wanted to add another benefit to the testing. Is the EPA confirmed, we met with them at length this morning, that they'll be able to take these results too, because they've been, for the last few months, taking the modeling and then doing the actual scientific study research to get the actuals so they can do the rulemaking, because the rulemaking has to be based on science and not just modeling. So we'll get a double benefit, not just the ATSDR, but the EPA is going to be able to use it because they anticipate getting the rulemaking underway this summer to set new regulations for the ETO. And I know I'm going to say this wrong, you've said it to me several times, the whole causation thing, that the emissions doesn't equal the concentration, which is not causation. Can you
Yeah.
explain that for the board?
Yeah, so again, I think this is where, with the NATA study, just a reminder there is that the NATA study is based off of modeling. So that's based off of mathematical models, with emissions. And so generally, to your question, Trustee Bohms, is that they usually don't put in, the other sources that are in there. They're just basing that on the emissions. And that's just risk. That's just a risk. It's not calculating a concentration. That's what the ambient air testing will help us do, is what concentrations are out there. And then that way you have both the modeling and you have the ambient air that you can do, have a better understanding of what the potential risk is based on ambient air testing and the modeling. And so I think this is where, the other piece of assuring that we're going to be telling the public, communicating the risk. This is where I said to ATSDR is that if you look at Willowbrook right now, the risk is higher than the NATA. So how do we explain that to residents? You are living currently without Sterigenics operating, at a 1 in 1,000 additional risk, and this is additive. And I should point out is that, we're living longer lives. The good news is that we've done a great job on infectious diseases, albeit tell your residents to get their measles shots, so we have some infectious diseases reemerging. But, we are living longer, and so we all here, because we're Americans, have a 1 in 3 chance of dying from cancer. So just to put that into perspective, that's your risk just by being an American, is 1 in 3. So these are additive risks by being exposed to ETO.
Another thing I'd like you to explain for the board, at one of our meetings, you talked about the cancer study, the incident,
Yeah.
95% increase, which was 10 to 19, but that didn't include lifestyle choices, gender. So will our ATSDR health risk assessment take into consideration things that create the cancer that are outside of the ETO? So we get a true number of...
Yeah. So that's another thing we've requested of the Illinois Department of Public Health, is do a cancer incidence study like they did down in Willowbrook. So that cancer incidence study looked at the cancer registry of what people died of, what types of cancers. There were some unusual cancers that did pop up at a higher than normal level. There was other cancers that were lower. Some were the Hodgkin's lymphoma in women, or breast cancer in women, had a higher incidence than expected. But to what the mayor was saying is that, over that 20-plus year period of time that you went, you had 19 individuals that had died of Hodgkin's lymphoma, that was a female, the expected was 10. So, that's a 90% difference. But when you're talking 10 and 19, you're talking what we call small number syndrome. Small numbers are very unstable, and so that's where I think IDPH did a really good job in their report of, putting the caveats out there that, these are associations, but it's not causal. So you can say that there may be a higher incidence in this area of a certain type of cancer, but you can't say that it was caused by Sterigenics. These are all associations. They are not causality. That was the question you wanted me to answer before.
Yes,
Okay.
I try to remember everything that you've been
But
sharing with
IDPH
me.
is going to, they're looking to look at our community and look at other communities, because what they actually compared DuPage to us and other Collier counties, but they want to expand that study to other areas to see if they can attempt to get more linkage or associations based on ETO. But right now, they did find some variations and some differences, but again, they made it very clear that these are associations and that, with the limited data set, it was not causal.
So is our cancer risk in Lake County already higher than other areas of Illinois, or?
Well, again, looking at the cancer registry, but I think this is where you also, IDPH did a great job with the caveat, is that I know this trustee here probably has lived in Gurnee all her life, right?
No.
No? Close? Okay. Yeah, long time. So you haven't moved here, so going back to the NATA, that your risk, if you were exposed to this for 70 years, you would have a 1 in 10,000 risk living in one of those areas. So, but what we also have is that Americans move a lot more now. And so what these cancer incidence studies don't do is look at, okay, so Mark Pfister, he lived in Gurnee from 1991 to 1993 at 305 West Street, right across from the library. And then he moved out to, unincorporated Lake County, just outside of Gurnee, Bridlewoods. So I was over there for 3 years. Then I moved to Waukegan for 13 years, and now I've been in Lindenhurst for 10 years. Okay, so how do you describe my exposure? So that's the problem, is without looking at a detail, what occupation did I have? Did I smoke cigarettes? Because again, we know that you're going to have a much greater risk of dying, which is why we were a huge fan of Tobacco 21, and thank you, Gurnee, for your assistance in getting that passed at the state level and passing it here. But we know there's other risk factors that could cause you to be more susceptible to cancer, including genetics. So that's what they don't look at. They're just taking in, who died in this zip code at this time, and that's who's showing up at that point in time.
So even with the ATSDR report, health assessment, we can't conclusively say that there's causation.
Correct. Yeah,
Because
again,
of all the other
it's
factors.
linkages, it's association, it's correlation, but not causation.
Trustee Ross?
So the point of doing the study then is so we have information that may or may not be accurate because of other things, but then it's also to give the information to the EPA so that they could possibly use it to change their rules?
Well, yeah, so they would use it also for their rulemaking because that's something they're working on. They're also looking at the potency factor. Again, that number that linear, non-threshold linear model stems from. So they say, here's the risk along this line. But, I wouldn't use the terminology that there may be inaccurate data because that's why we're going to have 2 remote sites. What is the natural background? And then around these plants, what is it as you move away from the plants? What does the concentration look like as it goes? So it'll also give us a better understanding of the dispersion or the gradation of ETO as it moves away from these plants.
I didn't mean the study, I meant because you don't know what the other factors are.
Oh, right.
That's where the
Yeah,
inaccuracy.
and again, I think that's what we'll be looking at. So those remote sites, let's say they're very similar to the concentrations that were found when Sterigenics wasn't operating. We can make some extrapolations between those points, which is why we wanted to have a couple of 2 remote sites too.
Yeah, when I talked to the EPA Region 5 about this testing and stuff, when we were talking about Vantage, I pointed out there's 3 school bus depots all within a quarter mile, and they were like, they know that impacts it because school buses emit the ETO, and so that could, that starts impacting their data for their modeling when you've got that many school buses in one location next to a site emitting ETO. So those are all factors that have to be taken in consideration when they're putting the results together and then using it for their rulemaking.
And actually, that's Mayor, that's an excellent point. So, for example, one of the sites that we're going to have on the southwest corner of Vantage, you have the bus depot just on 41. Well, if the wind's blowing out of the southwest and that canister's lighting up, but then you have the canisters on the northeast that, are the same concentration or higher, but then the winds are coming out of the northeast going to the southwest. So we'll be able to look at that, what is the pattern, because Vantage would not be affecting those canisters if the wind was blowing to the northeast. So we know that there may be some drift from that other site.
There's a lot that you can't just take the data. You have to layer in the meteorological stuff
Right.
and the wind and the uses around it. So there's a lot that goes into this, so just taking the numbers off the report really do not paint the complete picture.
Right, yeah.
I'm
and it's-
glad this is not my business.
And if the wind speed, I mean, that's the other thing too. We'll be looking at wind speed. If it's 2 miles per hour, it's going to be sitting there. If you're at 20 mile per hour, 30 mile per hour winds, it's going to move it out a lot faster.
So other questions for Mark? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we vote, just on the intergovernmental agreement with Lake County for them to be the project managers. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by trustee Garner, second by trustee O'Brien. Roll call, please, Andy.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstenson.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Balmus.
All right,
Aye.
motion carries. The next, item number 6, is approval of ordinance 2019-40, authorizing a professional services agreement between the Village of Gurnee and GHD Services. This is just a contract that the county will manage on our behalf to actually have the testing done. Any questions? Motion?
So moved.
Motion by trustee O'Brien, second by trustee Garner. Roll call, please, Andy.
Hood.
Yes.
Thorstenson.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Balmus.
Aye.
6 aye.
All right, motion carries. Again, Mark, thank you. Without your leadership on this, the whole thought of us undertaking air monitoring and quality and all that was daunting. So, very appreciative of you stepping into the fray here and helping us sort it out and taking the lead on coming up with some good solutions that will get us some results that are meaningful and actionable.
No, again, I thank this board for your consideration of this and also the approval. We'll start ground truthing this week, so we'll get these canisters out there. One thing that I did mention is that we will not announce the exact date that we're starting for this, but we will be releasing that. We are collecting data.
All right. We will move on to item number 7, which is approval of resolution 2019-06 concerning the legalization of the recreational use of marijuana. We have a short PowerPoint presentation from Sean and Deputy Chief Jesse. This is, as you'll see and as you read, this is not, we're not judging on whether marijuana should be legalized or not, but there are some unintended consequences that our law enforcement is concerned about. So Sean put some information together for us.
So I'm Officer Sean Gaylor with the Gurnee Police Department. I'm the crime prevention officer over there. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights of the new cannabis bill that is being considered for the state. As you'll see here, it allows possession up to 30 grams by anybody over the age of 21. If you are under 21, it is illegal at that point. You also have the ability to cultivate up to 5 cannabis plants within your home. It has to be within a lock-secured area. That also includes outdoor venues such as greenhouses or sheds. They will also be expunging misdemeanor and Class 4 felony marijuana convictions. That's roughly 800,000 convictions here in the state of Illinois. And initially, there'll be no large-scale commercial growers, but down the line, they are looking to have that added to the bill as well. So the benefit that we have here in Illinois is that other states have already considered recreational marijuana to be legalized in their state, so we can kind of look through that history and the data so far to see where we stand with some of the issues that we face in law enforcement. So driving under the influence, you'll see here in Colorado, those who have been driving under the influence of drugs, specifically with marijuana, 76% of the time they were influenced by marijuana. In Washington, their drug driving fatalities have doubled. And then in Oregon, they have special drug recognition experts. They are specifically trained to recognize drug indications and impairment while driving. And they've noticed in 2015, 50% of those drivers were under the influence of THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana. So some of the key points to consider, especially from a law enforcement standpoint, we currently have no devices available to us as law enforcement to detect marijuana detection in people who are driving. As compared to driving under the influence of alcohol, we have devices that we can use on the street that help us determine that indication. there's nothing technically available yet for marijuana. It's still in the process. Our officers would require additional training in order to be able to determine who is under the influence of marijuana, and that imposes significant costs because most of our officers would need to be drug recognition experts, which is a very time-consuming class that our officers would have to go to. Currently, we have one of those experts in our department. Another thing to consider is the calls for service. What we've been noticing in all these other states is the dramatic increase in hospital visits from people under the influence. In Oregon here, it's 2,000% increase just based on people who have marijuana poisoning. These are some calls that we haven't even been seeing in the past, and now they're coming to light because marijuana is laced with things that we are unaware of, and people are taking too much of it and unfortunately getting poisoned by it. Colorado has the same increases of 81%, and that's from 2011 to 2015. You can see the difference in emergency room visits. So from 2011, this was before the legalization of marijuana, there were over 6,000 emergency room visits. After the legalization, they were up over 11,000. So it almost doubled the amount of emergency rooms. So, and again, that takes calls into service for us, not only for the police department, but the fire department as well. So anytime somebody calls 911 because they're having a reaction to marijuana, that's a call for service for us. Another thing that the police department will deal greatly with is the increased crime rate. We've been seeing this all across the board in every state. These are just a few examples. Colorado has had an increase in property crimes and 18% increase in violent crimes. And that can include anything from robbery to battery, anything more serious and violent. Alaska has also had an increase in their misdemeanor crimes and vehicle thefts. You'll see here on the national average, they moved from 16th all the way up to 2nd in larceny crimes and 16th to 5th in motor vehicle thefts. So some of the key points to consider with this is the more marijuana dispensaries you have in a population, the more crimes you're going to see in that area. And that's been consistent across the board with all the states. A lot of people think that pot is legal, so you can smoke it anywhere at any time. That's not the case. So again, calls for service for law enforcement to go out and recognize that people are smoking marijuana on the street. You can't do that. That's illegal. That takes up time for calls for service for us. We also need to have the law enforcement legal aspect of that as well. And then the other bigger concern that we see here is the homegrown cannabis here in our state. This is something a little bit new. It's not every state has this, but this is very difficult for us to regulate that. We can't just go into somebody's home and count the number of plants and move on to the next house. We can obviously ask for consent, but majority of the homeowners will not allow us into their home. So establishing a means or a probable cause or reasonable suspicion to go in and get a search warrant is very, very unlikely as well. So we're pretty much putting this into the hands of the residents to hope that they're following the law and only growing 5 plants at a time. Another thing that a lot of other states have seen with this as well is the cartels are establishing businesses in all these states now. So what that means is they're moving their operations up into North America, they're building their operations here, and what comes with that is robberies, shootings, and other violent crimes. It's not to say it's going to happen here, but it is a potential that we need to at least consider. So what we're asking here is to consider as well the children and how it affects them once this marijuana law takes effect. So you'll see here that the schools are significantly seeing increases in marijuana usage and possession. In Colorado, it's increased by 34% in the elementary schools and high schools. Minors have also been arrested for marijuana use. That's up by 5% in Colorado as well. This number is staggering to me in Anchorage. 141% increase in in-school suspensions for marijuana use or possession. So these are any kids who have it on them or were caught smoking marijuana while in school, and they get suspended for it. So what this is basically saying to us is that it's a little bit more accessible to minors now that it is legal, and that's something that we have to take into consideration. So selling to minors, you'll see here there's 288 violations of licensed dispensaries. So that everybody's licensed, they all have to go through the same rules and regulations when selling marijuana, but they're still getting caught selling to minors. And same thing here, minors are not allowed in most of those dispensaries, but they're still letting them through the front door. In Oregon, they did a random inspection. 16 of 66 dispensaries were also caught selling to minors. This is very similar to what we're kind of seeing now with the tobacco. We have a law ordinance here in Gurnee that you have to be if you're under the age of 21, you can't purchase tobacco. We're still fighting that here within our own village. So we're doing the best that we can to try to combat that and stop minors from purchasing, but a lot of the problems, these dispensaries and the sales want to make sales. So they're not asking for ID, they're not doing the proper protocols, and these are some of the same issues that we'll face if marijuana becomes legalized here. So our basic proposition here is that we don't know what the overall social impact is going to be here in Illinois. It could be different than these other states, but until we investigate it a little bit more, we may not know exactly what that means. The social costs appear to outweigh the tax revenues that we're going to get from marijuana. And we're seeing that in other states, just like I mentioned with the emergency room visits. Those calls for service are going way up, and it's not offsetting the tax revenue that we're bringing in from marijuana. So that's something that needs to be considered. The children's health is obviously a huge impact here. We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. Tobacco, we've had many decades to investigate that. Marijuana, not as heavily investigated. So we don't know what those long-term effects are going to be on the children. Obviously, short-term, they're getting in trouble a little bit more frequently. And then the overall well-being of the community. We want to make sure that the community stays safe. We can keep it a safe environment for people to come and visit all the attractions that we have here in town. So it's just something that we need to consider and kind of take into consideration before the state moves forward with approving the bill. If you have any questions, we'll take those now too.
Excellent job, Sean. Again, the resolution was not intended to weigh in on whether marijuana should be legalized or not, but there are some unintended consequences that are not addressed by the legislation today that will fall squarely on the shoulders of our officers, and we want to make sure that those are addressed in any legislation before it's impacted. So with the passing of the resolution, if the board's vote is affirmative, we will share it with our legislators just to say there's a few more things you need to think about before passing this. Questions for Sean or?
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
I know the motion was by Trustee Balmas. I think it was Trustee Thorstensen. Trustee Thorstensen made the second. Do roll call. We're going to do a roll call vote.
Hood.
Roll call. Yes.
Go. Hood.
Yes.
Thorstensen.
Yes.
Ross.
Aye.
Garner.
Aye.
O'Brien.
Aye.
Balmas.
Aye.
6 aye.
All right, so the resolution passes, and we will share a copy with our legislators. All right. All right, it's the end of our new business, so I'll open the floor for public comment. State your name for the record and volunteer your address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Yolanta Pamatla. I'm a Gurnee resident. On behalf of the Stop ETO and Lake County Citizen Movement, I would like to thank you very much for this evening's approval and funding of the Lake County Health Department's ambient air testing. This is a moment we've been waiting for almost 6.5 months, and we are thrilled to see the vote go through today. So thank you so much. To answer Trustee Garner's question about what amount is safe to breathe in, of what levels are deemed safe, no amount of a mutanogen is safe. Unlike other pollution sources, ETO is different in that it mutates your DNA significantly, increasing your cancer risk. That is a stance that a lot of scientists and researchers abide by, so just something to point out. To Trustee Balmas, I think you have an excellent idea there with suggesting to temporarily shut down the facilities for a limited time to see how ETO levels drop, and then you could compare those levels to what was tested during ambient testing. I think that is a statement and something that the Stop ETO movement would strongly support. The EPA will be here in town, actually, in Waukegan this Thursday, the Illinois EPA. They will be holding a community meeting to discuss permit changes for Medline. I'm not sure if that was discussed earlier or not, but that will be happening at Witter Elementary School in room 901, which is located on North Lewis Avenue in Waukegan, Illinois. The National Cancer Institute, I just wanted to point out something since you guys asked wonderful questions tonight. There is a mapping tool from the National Cancer Institute that you can plug in, it's a map tool. You can plug in filters to look for specific cancers, and then you could see the rates of that cancer in a particular area in Illinois. So if you use this mapping tool and you apply breast cancer, lymphoma, and other cancers associated to ETO, our community has one of the highest cancer rates in the state of Illinois. I could send you all a link to that mapping tool because we've been looking at it and we've been analyzing the results. So I'll send you an email tonight. And then finally, I just want to emphasize that we are not lab rats. We do not need any more experts telling us that that this is just a correlation and not a causation between ETO emissions and incidence of cancer. There are countless research studies that have confirmed ETO is a cancer and reproductive hazard. So thank you so much for approving the vote tonight for the testing, and we look forward to the results. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diane Sorofka. I've lived in Gurnee for 31 years, and I'm here to talk about two issues, but I'm going to start with my first one, and that's that marijuana thing. Okay, so relative to data collection, that they didn't have any information. I happen to know on personal experience, they've been collecting data since 68 and 69, so that's a lot of data being collected. I found it of interest that the states that were being related to in the presentation, Oregon, Colorado, Alaska, not exactly the top 10 populated states. So it's easy to come up with a 141% increase in any of those states because the officers have more time to go out and find people. There's more an opportunity to catch offenders. So that's all good news. Okay, back to ETO. A little diversion there. I'm very glad, and thank you very much for passing those two items on the agenda tonight. That was huge. We've been waiting almost 7 months to have that done. I wanted to talk about the Sterigenics facility. As you know, the governor put a seal on that plant. Sterigenics sued, Sterigenics lost. That plant is closed in perpetuity. Their rates to this day are continuing to be way off the chart. So even if they've closed down, it's in the air, it's in the subsoil, and they've been trying to dig it out of the dirt. 18-wheelers, we have proof. The neighbors are up 24 hours a day filming. Someone mentioned about the cancer rates, and two groups in the population are children and runners. I've never understood your heart has so many beats why you go out and waste them on running. But the reason that is because their metabolisms are kicked in. Children's DNA is changing. One thing that I remembered when I was a kid, my brother and I had double pneumonia. We had the shots. We got we got better. We know that the children are most affected. They get better. No, they don't get better. Because once it hits the DNA, that is carried in all the bloodlines in perpetuity. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren, all the way down. It's in that DNA. The propensity of it popping at any time remains the same, whether they're 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, how many generations it goes up. And that's what really has us upset and concerned for our children. And it's scary. I'm glad that you're all invited to that meeting. I'm sorry, I get upset about the kids. When I talked about Sterigenics still being closed down, the amount that they are right now is 10 times higher than the standard for EPA. The other thing that Mr. Pfister did not address is the news report that came out this morning, and that's with regard to the EPA. EPA right now is going to change their maximum amount and minimum amount under the Clean Air Act that has already been put through. And what they're going to do is they are going to change the limit for, not for ETO, but for factories and manufacturers that are dirtying up the air. Not ETO, but other areas. What that will do is that the plants will not be held liable for all of the cases that they have right now. That's not good because we are right behind them. They've already talked about moving ETO into another category that is not going to scare the people because it's carcinogenic. We won't notice it. It'll be like that ammonia spill that we had over there. It's not a cancerogenic thing. I'm the woman that went to EPA in Washington and testified in front of that board. There's been no mention since we had that meeting on March 27th. Nothing. Durbin, Duckworth, Lipinski, I could go on. They presented to EPA. They've got nothing back from EPA, and it was supposed to be presented to Congress, what they found. Anything, pretty much anything down to a coffee cup napkin. If it had those 3 letters on it, they wanted it. ETA is not releasing the data this way. So anyway, that's all I had to do. I wanted to
Oh, just one other thing about capturing data. This is important. Mr. Pfister talked to the point of people moving from place to place. We've been on vacation, we know that, we want to stay in Florida, whatever. And we don't know how to contact those people. There has been a call out to anybody living not only in Gurnee and Waukegan and Willowbrook, but to any people close to these areas. Come out, tell us what your symptoms are. Could be nothing, could be nothing. Could be maybe something. The person that's gathering all that data is Erin Brockovich, and I think we know who Erin is. She will be gathering the data and doing her analysis on it as well. So whether it's nothing or it's a something, they would have to prove that they live in these locations. They would have to prove, just like we do now, that you've had no concomitant indications prior to being exposed to the ETO. So, I mean, that's going to be a clean study, and that's going to be nationwide, trying to find these people that we're not able to capture under our health group in the county. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the record, Andy, it's the temporary seal order was dismissed on jurisdiction, not on merit, and it's been refiled under what appears to be the appropriate jurisdiction. I think all the trustees probably received the new filing, so it's not a permanent done deal, like never to appear again. So I just want the record to reflect that, so no one thinks that something happened that didn't. Go ahead, sir. Oh, I thought you were getting up to talk.
Good evening. My name is Arthur Jones. I've been a resident of Gurnee for 25 years. My question is, will the residents of Gurnee also have linked to that information that the young lady talked about? You had mentioned that you were going to send a link with data to the trustees. So will we be able to get that information as well?
We have a website that has credible information. So I'm more than happy to share that with you. I'm not going to call you out of order, but you can't speak from the audience without coming. You can then come back up and address, but we can't just have a free-for-all. Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, if not, do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Trustee Ballmer, second by Trustee Garner. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.